Appreciate that. And they put the spiciest sessions at the end, just to name, like this is going to be the most exciting, interesting, controversial, mind-blowing thing to take you all, for you all to take home with you and to leave with. So, yeah. Are we ready to start? Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I love that energy. Thank you. So yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I'm Chris Schilt. I'm the director of the Regional Suburban Organizing Project, which I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. But this is our session, Organizing to Shift Power in the Suburbs. So hopefully you all are in the right room. You're definitely in the right room. This is going to be a great conversation. We're going to do it conversation style. So I have like a couple slides that I'm going to share at the beginning and give some opening framing and contextualization of the conversation. And then I'll introduce our three amazing panelists here, and we'll do some Q&A style with them. I'll ask them some questions, and then I want you all to ask questions, and also for folks who are joining online, thanks for being here virtually, and we'll also take questions online, so drop them in the chat. But first, just to get a sense of who all is in the room, curious how many people here do work in the suburbs, whatever kind of work that might be. Yes, okay, we got a couple folks. And what about do organizing work in the suburbs? Or maybe you work with organizers in the suburbs. Awesome, okay, and a couple organizers. So just to acknowledge, like, not all of the expertise is up here. It's everywhere in the room, so please bring your thoughts and ideas as well. You can ask us questions, but you can also share your own stories and experiences. So with that, I'm going to move into a little bit about what is the suburbs and some context here. This might be what a lot of folks think of.
Where did that add up here?
That's a good question. I don't know. I got it off the internet, but I think that when people hear suburbs, a lot of different ideas and images come to mind. This might be one of them, kind of rooted in a 1950s notion of a white family, a nuclear family with a white picket fence and a dog and a kid and all of that stuff. But I want us to contextualize both looking further back into history, as well as bringing these ideas of the suburbs into the present day.
Yes, well, I grew up in a middle-class nuclear family. The family that's in the house I grew up in is my brother. It's a three-generation, one single male, a single
Yep.
mom with two daughters. One of the daughters a single mom of two children, so it's a three-generation extended family under one roof. Under one roof.
Well, there you go. A multi-generational families in a home. Absolutely. And I think many of us who are doing this work in housing have some sense of the suburbs being shaped by exclusionary practices and by direct violence. It's also been shaped by stories of resistance and of organizing. And so we want to locate not only what have been the structural violence and systems that have created the suburbs, but also what has been the organizing that's contested that. That's rooted in the suburbs as well. There's really rich suburban organizing traditions. So first, to step back and look at our history and recognize the land that we're on here. In Sacramento, we are here on stolen land, on indigenous lands. This is the land of the Nisenan, Maidu, Miwok, and Miwok peoples who lived here from time immemorial. But during the eras of Spanish and Mexican and American colonialism here in this country, we had the development of the mission system, the ranchos, and indentured servitude that led to dispossession and genocide of indigenous peoples here. And so the population declined tremendously from 1770 here, over 300,000 people in the state. by the beginning of the 20th century, only a couple tens of thousands of people left, and it has grown some. But to acknowledge that when we are talking about the suburbs, the geography of cities in the state of California are very much mapped onto where our missions and our ranchos were. That a lot of the names of our cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Pablo, San Rafael, are where these missions and these ranchos were. And that system of depopulating the land and concentrating indigenous peoples into missions and through indentured servitude and the actual direct violence and killing of indigenous people is what emptied the land for agricultural ranching uses and then eventually for suburbanization. So that is the landscape on which the suburbs have been built. Beyond that geography, this era, early era of colonialism is what shaped the legal systems that many of us are fighting. When we talk about organizing to shift power in the suburbs, the power that we're looking at, the systems of violence that we are trying to change are deeply rooted in individual property rights, which were established during this colonial era, right? And so the notion of individual property ownership as opposed to human rights or collective stewardship or collective responsibility is a system that was established in order to dispossess indigenous peoples of their land and then carries through from that era as we go on to the next period in the 20th century of what many people see as the growth of kind of modern day suburbanization, right? And so when we're looking at the expansion during post-World War II era of the suburbs and the systems of racial segregation, racial exclusion, and also direct violence that was used to keep people of color out of the suburbs, a lot of that is rooted in notions of individual property rights up through the present day as we're talking about those of us who are working on campaigns, whether it's for rent control or community land trusts or to build affordable housing in our communities, you hear about these narratives, these cultural values of property owners' property rights over the right for someone to have a safe and decent place to live. So we want to trace back where those legal systems and those cultural values and norms really came from in this country. In the post-World War II era with the expansion of the suburbs, there's been a lot of research written about that. A couple of great books, probably many people here are familiar with them. Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, Freedom to Discriminate by Jean Slater just came out more recently and is a really incredible history of the ways in which the realtors in particular kind of colluded with local and federal governments in order to concentrate wealth and power in white communities by using tools of racial segregation, using tools of racially restrictive covenants, of redlining, racial steering, and other sort of methods. And so that is what I think when many of us think of the suburbs today, and that early image of the first image that I showed of the white family in the single family home, a lot of that was created through these kind of de jure legal systems of racial segregation. But on top of that landscape of violence and exclusion, there's also been a rich history of organizing and resistance. So I also wanted to acknowledge some of the organizing work that has been rooted in the suburbs during this entire time and has resisted that and has also shaped our suburban landscape today. So this headline at the top here is about the work that the NAACP did for the first decades in the early 20th century of political organizing and legal strategy to overturn those de jure segregation laws, right? To overturn racially restricted covenants, to overturn redlining. And the great work by Thurgood Marshall and Lauren Miller and others who waged those fights oftentimes in the suburbs. This poster on the right, the Vote Yes Today, is about a campaign in East Palo Alto in the 1980s. So East Palo Alto is an unincorporated city in San Mateo County, where Evie works. And it was a place for decades where both Black and brown communities, both homeowners and renters, had been living, and also where the county had been locating a lot of environmental toxic activities due to environmental racism and kind of dumping the more toxic uses in that part of the county. And so the residents stood up to that. They organized to incorporate as their own city in the early 1980s, and it was through an alliance of Black and brown homeowners and with renters that they won the ballot initiative to incorporate, and then also with that political momentum actually created one of the first rent control laws in the state. So it was this partnership of renters with Black and brown homeowners that created this coalition in the suburbs to pass some of the early renter protections in the region. And then this last image here is from an interfaith organizing group called Cisco, which is a part of the PICO network that was doing organizing work in the late 2000s in East Contra Costa County. I had the privilege to actually be working with them as an advocate at the time. But when the foreclosure crisis was hitting in East County. And so this brings us into the 21st century of as lower income people, as people of color were moving out into the suburbs, many of them being enticed with lower housing costs and being kind of racially steered and targeted for predatory loan and mortgage products. In places like East Contra Costa County in the late 2000s, that kind of exploded as the foreclosure crisis happened and kind of that mortgage bubble popped. And many people lost their homes and lost their wealth in that process. But also there was a lot of organizing to address that. So Cisco led some incredible organizing efforts, taking on some of the major national banks here in California, but also going to DC and doing federal advocacy to reform a lot of those more predatory mortgage products and to change those laws. So I wanted to just take that moment to root ourselves in both the history of the development of the suburbs and the structures and the systems that have done it, as well as the organizing traditions that have been fighting against those systems and have been continuing to transform our suburbs even today. And that's what our conversation on the panel is going to be talking about, is what is the organizing going on in the suburbs today. So as I mentioned, I'm with the Regional Suburban Organizing Project. We are a collaboration of 8 organizations in the Bay Area. So this is the 9-county Bay Area. That's the organizations. Today we have folks from Housing Leadership Council, North Bay Organizing Project, and Monument Impact. I'll introduce them in just a minute.
What's the date on that news article? I want to look it up.
Oh, I don't know the date on it, but why don't you stick around and we can look it up afterwards.
On the screen and then I forgot it as I was jotting it down.
Okay, we'll look it up. So the Regional Suburban Organizing Project, we came together a few years ago recognizing that there is a lot of coalition work happening in the Bay Area around housing, around the Bay Area. We talk about the 3 Ps, right? The tenant protections, affordable housing preservation, affordable housing production. And yet we wanted to have a space that was focused on how are we actually building up the organizing capacity in the suburbs to contest for power and to shift the power structures in the suburbs away from what has historically been, you know, as we were just looking at in the history, something that has upheld these kind of white private property rights towards something that is closer towards housing as a human right and housing as a human need. And inclusive, affordable housing for all. So we have been working together. I joined last fall and running organizing trainings in building electoral data tools and power mapping and really supporting building up organizing capacity in the suburbs. So I'm going to briefly introduce our 3 folks, and actually thankfully they sat in order of I have questions for them, so I can just turn and ask them questions. But first, just to introduce, we have Evelyn Stivers, a Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. And she's been there, is it 6 years?
Yeah,
6 years.
yeah, let's say 6 years.
Okay, I've known Evie through many evolutions of roles that both she and I have had doing organizing and advocacy work in the Bay Area. So her current work focuses in San Mateo County, but I can attest to she has worked throughout the region on these issues. We also have Karim Sanchez, who's the executive director of the North Bay Organizing Project up in Sonoma County. And he comes from a background of restorative school justice organizing and programs in the Santa Rosa school system, getting restorative justice set up there. And then was in the Central Valley for a while as an organizer and came back to MBOP and to his organizing roots in Sonoma. And finally, Tony Bravo at Monument Impact, a community organizing manager, who, as I just learned, actually comes from New York, but we're blessed to have him here in Contra Costa County, in Concord, and East County. Previously, Tony's led the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance, and so comes from kind of an organizing background with immigration rights issues and in the community, and is currently working on housing organizing in Concord and that area. So I'll also let them all talk a little bit more about their organizations and their work. But we thought rather than listening to one presentation after another, we're gonna do this interview style and just like get right into some juicy questions. So where are my juicy questions? All right. So I'm gonna start with Evie. And as I mentioned, Evie and I known each other for a long time. Evie actually taught me many things about community organizing and policy advocacy work when I was starting out 15 years ago. And one of the things that Evie explained to me early on that I want her to talk through today is what is the difference between community organizing and policy advocacy or advocacy organizing? Like, let's just have some baseline. What is the difference? Why is it important to recognize that difference? And then kind of where does HLC fall in that spectrum? And I'll add to that, you should also say more about what HLC is.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Evie, and I work with Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work in San Mateo County, oddly enough, on housing policy. We work on the full range of housing policies, from protecting individuals that are currently housed, to getting people housed, to protecting non-subsidized affordable housing, and also getting new affordable homes built. The area that we work in, just south of San Francisco and north of San Jose on the peninsula, was historically a white flight suburb. So that suburban family was probably very much one of the ads that you would see for a housing development in a city like San Mateo or Daly City or Redwood City. It's changed a lot over the last 30 years. It's actually becoming more diverse in a lot of ways. But it still has a shortage. Our county, even though we have about half the population of Alameda County, for example, we have less than an eighth the number of affordable homes. So, and far less public housing. I know we don't build public housing anymore, but we just don't have the affordable housing. When I first started working in the county attorney said at the first meeting that I went to from the County Board of Supervisors when they were allocating some funding for affordable housing is, we don't build that here because then we're gonna have to provide services and they're never gonna go away. And that was a very pervasive attitude of San Mateo County leaders at the time, is don't build affordable housing because you'll never get rid of poor people. Pretty awful, pretty ugly. But not everyone feels that way, and you can build support and leadership in other ways. So that's, yeah, we are an advocacy organization. That means we advocate for pro-housing policies. We are a membership organization. We absolutely listen to our members. Our members set our policies and our priorities, but our members are all pro-housing people. So we will not oppose an affordable housing development no matter who in the neighborhood doesn't like it. That's just who we are and why we are. that is very similar to somebody who, there are organizations that have specific communities that they organize, and they work on the needs of that community, whether it's healthcare, immigration rights, housing. There's a lot of needs that local communities have. Those organizations are often our strongest partners and our most important partners. But even if they don't agree with us on a specific affordable housing development, we're still going to support it. So that's just who we are. And so similar to reproductive rights or rights to healthcare or any other issue where it's highly controversial, especially when it comes to the specific decisions. But yeah, that's been especially important recently. So most recently in Menlo Park, the city is finally getting to the point where they have to require, they have to look at sites outside of the Black neighborhood because of affirmatively furthering fair housing and the housing element. And the school district, it's a basic aid school district, so they're not reliant on state money.
It's a what school district?
Basic aid. It means that they get all of their money from local taxes and they don't get state money. So they don't have any incentive to have new students or new low-income students. And the school district has been very actively opposed to affordable housing, very openly saying that it'll ruin the schools. So we've got a lot of angry parents in the areas, even some renters that don't want their kids to have to go to school with kids that are going to ruin the school. Nobody wants their schools to get ruined, right? So it's been really challenging. It's a really challenging environment. But I think we're an important voice in that conversation, and yeah, we're going to be noisy anyway.
So let me ask you then a follow-up. So recognizing that environment, where's this mic? There we go. Recognizing that political environment where a lot of the places where you're organizing are more wealthy, exclusive, even if, there might be diverse neighborhoods within the city, but the majority, like a city like Menlo Park, the majority is wealthier, probably mostly white. How do you organize there?
So there's three main ways that we organize. So one is we directly recruit people that are pro-housing voices by endorsing specific developments or supporting specific policies, and then we recruit people around those policies or programs. So we ask people, we literally go to the DMV and ask people if they will support a pro-housing platform, right? And try to get them to sign a petition for a pro-housing platform. Or we will go to the BART station, or we will go to the grocery store, or movie night, or the small truck. Anyway, look for people wherever we can find them. Two, we partner with community groups, and not just community-based organizations like the ones we have at the table, but organizations that support specific populations, like the developmentally disabled, or the mental health challenged communities, or formerly homeless, because those populations are often excluded from the conversation, even if they're well organized. So we try to push them at the table, elbow a space for them at the table. And then third, we work with experts and people that are practitioners in affordable housing development to try to bring expertise to the table and to the conversation. So we work with people that have been developing affordable housing for 30 years, or that have been financing it, or have been designing it. All of the architects, builders, all of the people with expertise. And while there's not a lot of them, they can be incredibly well-positioned in specific suburban jurisdictions to have influence in a way that we wouldn't have access to if we didn't tap into it.
Thank you. Karim, I kind of want to throw the question I asked Evie to you as well. If you want to both say a little bit about what North Bay Organizing Project is, but also to talk from your perspective, what is community organizing compared to policy advocacy? And Evie just described their work as policy advocates. How do you describe your work in community organizing?
Yeah, thank you, and hello everyone. Again, my name is Karim Sanchez. I use él, he, him, his pronouns. And North Bay Organizing Project, we're essentially a coalition of over 20 organizations that includes churches, community-based organizations, students, environmentalists, and we come together really for one purpose, which is power, right? Community organizing is fundamentally about power. At NBOP, we believe that those who are closest to the suffering that happens from structural violence should be the closest to the solutions as well. And so when I think about the difference between advocacy and community organizing, I think about the difference between appealing to someone's morality or sense of values versus no, you have to do this because you don't have any other choice, or else we're going to vote you out. So I think that that's definitely our approach, and it differs sometimes. I know, like our organizations may sometimes be perceived as being on separate, like different places on a spectrum of support or of housing. I think for sure we're usually looked at as being a little way to the left, or that we're willing to take a little bit more risk, is the way that I like to put it. We do a little bit more direct action. But in the suburbs, there isn't a whole lot of other organizations to be in coalition with. And if we're serious about building power, we have to figure out where are the places where we can work together. And also, I think just the reality of, like, while organizations like ours may be pushing the conversation way to one extreme, it allows for folks in the center to get some work done that I think is valuable for all of us.
Awesome. I also want to ask a little bit more about the community that you organize in, because it's Sonoma County. And folks in the room might have their ideas about Sonoma County as well. Maybe people have gone to wineries there,
Right.
or gone to the Russian River. But can you say a little bit about about organizing low-income renters in communities that are majority white or majority homeowner in Sonoma County? So, like, Petaluma, one of the cities I know you organize in, is almost 2/3 white and majority homeowner. So what's your strategy to build power and win in that kind of situation?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, because I do think that there's often this perception that folks up in Sonoma County that we're really comfortable living in all this luxury, right? Because it's wine country. But something that was very clear to me, so I got started in community organizing as a student leader when I was working at a farm, at Olive Tree Farm in Sonoma. And something that I understood was that there's two Sonoma counties. There's one Sonoma County that for folks to come and rent out an Airbnb and go to these castle-like wineries and drink the fancy wine. And then there's another Sonoma County for folks like myself who lived in Roseland, which is the brown part of town in Santa Rosa. I was driving an old beat-up Toyota, hoping it wouldn't break down. I knew that participating in that luxury wasn't for me, right? And that's the folks that we're continuing to work with. In Sonoma County, we also experienced one of the lowest vacancy rates. So our rent started going way up in 2014. We wanted to contest for power there, and one of the ways that we're doing that is by building the Sonoma County Tenants Union. So one of the arenas that is often where power is often uncontested, is in the corporate arena, and we hear a lot of times about the well-meaning landlords, right? And the landlords that, not all landlords are bad. Sure, I might believe that, but oftentimes they get to hide behind management companies that are squeezing working class families for everything they got, right? From everything on top of rent, we're also paying pet rent, and then we're also paying visitor parking fees, and then even if you're paying those visitor parking fees, sometimes you still get towed, and then you have to pay even more fees to get your car back so you can go to work and continue to pay fees, right? So working class families are being squeezed for everything, and the only way that we have to be able to respond to that is to organize our neighbors and organize apartment associations that can then join with other apartment associations. And so what we do is we have a tenant counseling hotline that we promote in that's bilingual, and folks could call in and talk to a tenant counselor. And really what we're looking for is not only to connect them to some legal services when that's needed, but also opportunities to invite them into organizing, right? Where we're saying, look, here's the problem that's happening to you, and here's how you could probably solve it, but I know that it's happening to other people. I know that it's happening to your neighbors. Let's go knock on their doors. Let's hold a house meeting, and then let's go deliver these demands to the property management. And when you do that, we're going to bring out all these other tenant associations that are going to show up with you. So that's one of the ways that we're doing it.
Awesome, thank you. I have more questions, but I want to make sure we get all the voices in here. So Tony, would love to hear from you a little bit about where Monument Impact organizes in Concord, and now you've recently expanded out to Naacp, but say a little bit about that, about those communities, and about, what are the policies that you're organizing for right now, particularly in Concord. What has that experience been like?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I work with Monument Impact. Monument Impact is a nonprofit organization that has existed for 20 years now. It started off as an organization that provided direct service to community members in the city of Concord. And once we got a new ED 5 years ago, she realized who's doing any organizing in Concord or in Contra Costa County, or at least the central part of the county. And so she started the organizing program. So our program has been active for 5 years, probably a shorter time compared to other organizations, and our organization is unique in the sense that we do direct service and we do community organizing, advocacy, and base building. And so that makes my job a lot easier because we tap into the members that our other programs are working into, because we realized that our folks are coming in at least because of the pandemic. A lot of them, we work with immigrant, refugee, and low-income community members, and a lot of folks, a lot of families did not know how to use a computer to support their kid, how to join a Zoom. And so we started providing technology classes, and then we realized, well, after speaking with them, this is happening, but then they have housing issues, then they have immigration issues, other issues that are coming up. So that's how we were able to create a pipeline for us to say, okay, let's start developing leadership development here. Like, these are potential leaders to make changes in their community, in their neighborhood, in their apartment complexes. And that's how we have been able to foster this leadership and start creating we hope, a political shift in Contra Costa County. Does anyone here work in Contra Costa County? Has ever been to Contra Costa County?
I live in Contra Costa County.
There you go. So many of you know what I'm talking about. You know that the county is big and it's divided between the west, central, and east. And we work in central, and now we're doing work in East County. And for those who do know that East County is under-resourced. Community there is, heavily criminalized. There's barely any organizations who are doing any. There's a lot of direct service work, which is great, and it's very much needed and it's important, but there's no organizing that's being done. And so that's where we are coming in to start doing some of that work at the moment. And in Concord, for those who don't know, our elected officials, all white. People who do not represent the values of our communities.
In Antioch, a white mayor was booted out. He ran a very blatantly racist.
Absolutely.
campaign, Sean Wright. He was booted out in the last.
He was.
But I mean, the racist overtones, the racist dog whistles had to be read to be believed. I mean, he basically was appealing to an older constituency, and he was basically appealing to racial fears. I mean, crime is a problem. I was assaulted on BART a couple weeks ago, but you have to deal with rough people. I had I had opposed a liquor license for the 7-Eleven, not because I'm some kind of neo-prohibitionist, but because I felt that given the problems in the neighborhood, that was not an appropriate place for it. Would have no problem in a neighborhood without a lot of problems, but people, for good or ill, people on fixed incomes do not overdrink, largely because it's the way they handle it, and only makes matters worse because they engage in behaviors that get them in trouble, and it's a very difficult situation because a lot of white middle-class progressives who are anti-police and so on don't understand that people like me are caught in the middle between an often unfriendly law enforcement and the very real fact problem of violent crime. I was assaulted by a person who was probably on meth or at the very least drunk. I do not, and it's a problem because I think a lot of white middle class progressives are the people out.
Sir, please let Tony share.
No, thank you. It's all good. And I definitely hear what you're talking about in Antioch. Definitely. And the former mayor got voted out, and now we have the very first black mayor in Antioch, and now he's in the process of getting recalled. And so the idea of like,
When does the recall happen?
it's going to happen. Yeah, it's going to happen soon, and that's going to, go down. And
It's going to be on the ballot.
I think
they're still collecting signatures.
they're collecting
on
signatures,
it.
but it's just to show you like what white power has in the suburbs, right? What they're able to do when they are well organized, and we need to be just as organized as they are. And so in Concord,
Integrated public housing. The woman across from me
Definitely.
is African American. My best friend down the hallway is
Thank you. We do want to make sure we have
Irish and Greek
time for the
background
other
by his own
voices.
admission. The person's
and I'd be
Yeah,
happy to talk
thank
to you
you.
like afterwards, since seems like you know a lot about Antioch and Contra Costa. I'd be happy to talk to you after we finish off. But yeah,
So Tony, I do want to get back to what you were talking about in Concord and how you were able to connect some of the social service work to the organizing project that you all do and housing issues in Concord. So was curious if you could talk about the elected officials, but then also your campaign that you're doing right now for tenant protection.
Yeah, so in Concord, there are absolutely no tenant protections at all that exist. Folks have been organizing and mobilizing for the past 5 years around tenant protections, and with the current city council, it has been impossible. And as of lately, we finally, keeping our fingers crossed, have been able to organize and push them a little bit more. And now we are in the process of getting hopefully a strong anti-harassment ordinance, which is probably the only thing that this council will give us, and we will take that as a win. But that is something that we have been organizing tenants with right now. But, folks are trying to organize for legal protections, more direct legal services, but our thing is like, if we don't have protections, how can attorneys support, protect you? We need to have one before we can have the other. And so in Concord, some of the challenges that we have been seeing is those who are in power, right? But as Karim said, we have our own power, and we are responsible for building leadership and start shifting the power and the culture in a lot of these suburb cities.
Thank you. One thing that I think all three of you have been speaking to is, as we're looking at organizing in the suburbs, is just the number of partners to work with, like you were saying, Karim, is kind of limited, right? It's a little sparse, and who is there is who you have. And so there might be social service providers, there might be churches or religious institutions, or there might be organizations working with special needs populations, like you were talking about, Evie. But I'm curious if you all want to say a little bit more about how do you find people to work with you on, the housing campaigns that you work on in your communities. Do you want to, whoever wants to start?
I can go.
Sure.
So one fun thing about organizing, and the thing that I've always loved most about organizing, is the more difficult the situation is, the more ugly it can be publicly, the more you will find the gems of people that are willing to step up and try and work and put their heart and soul into it. And that's what we're finding, that's what we find in the communities that we work in, is you just find these people that are like, I don't care, it's just right, we just gotta do it. And you might not make the change that year, right? You not build up enough momentum to change it in 5 years. You might have really anemic, what feels like really anemic successes, and you're like, why do I do this? But Antioch was Nowheresville 20 years ago, and now you've built enough political power to make some significant change, right? So you just got to surf those political changes as they come and keep working on the capacity. And it's fun.
Yeah. For us, we understand at NBOP that the fundamental building block for community organizing is a relationship, right? Like how we relate to the person next to us in the pews at the church that we go to, or our neighbors across the hallway, or right next door, or right upstairs, and that's really what we invite folks into. I really like what y'all got going on about a service, like a service, because and then like an invitation into organizing, because I think that there's a really awesome pipeline there that reminds me of that saying, the saying where they say, if you feed the hungry, they call you a good Christian. If you ask why they're hungry, they'll call you a communist. You all heard that? It sort of reminds me of that, right? Because like as we are dealing with folks' immediate needs, right? Whether for us, it's usually things like I mentioned, these tow companies that are towing folks' cars, or neglect from management companies to do repairs where there's mold in the walls or cockroaches and things like that. What we really want to do is invite folks into a long-term community organizing that really addresses the root cause of what they're experiencing. So we do take the time to, our organizers go out, do one-to-ones, and build meaningful relationships with the folks that we're working with.
Yeah, I think and I'm sure that this isn't unique to where I work at Monument Impact, but I mean, the pandemic really took a toll when it for organizing. Everything was virtual. The relationship aspect is the most important thing, building trust with people. And it's hard to do that when you can't meet someone face to face. So the pandemic definitely has had a huge impact. And I think slowly now, we're able to be here in this conference in person, and it's a hybrid mode. We have slowly also been able to start speaking with people, having those one-on-ones, start the relationship building. But I also think that this pandemic really showed, for certain people, a little more clear. It was more visible to see the impact that it had on them as far as the injustice that exists, the systems that exist in this country, where we live, where we work. And I think that really sparked a fire in a lot of people to want to create and work towards change. And as organizers, as Karim said, like, our thing is like we got to get to the root of it. And I think for me, that's the difference between organizing and advocacy, because we as organizers have to get to the root of any issue that our communities are dealing with. And so I think now we're not out of COVID yet, but I'm grateful that we get to at least have some in-person connection again. As an organizer, it's something that I definitely miss, the relationship that you get to create with people, and to create a change and then get a win. And doing that together, I think, is the most exciting part about organizing, celebrating, which we don't really do a lot of. But even in the struggle, we're in it together, and I think that that's what keeps a lot of us going, and definitely keeps me going.
Awesome. That brings me my next question of how organizing has worked in the pandemic. But as we're starting to come out of it a little bit, right, and we're still very much in the pandemic in terms of people's experiences and economic experiences. The big fight last week around the state once again lifting another layer of eviction protections as they extended protections for people who still have a rental application pending is just another reminder of how maybe our relief programs and want to pretend that this pandemic and economic crisis is over for our communities before our communities have experienced it being over, right? And are still very much in it. But I'm curious, when you talk about some of the organizing tactics and tools that you've used, what worked for you during the pandemic that you want to try to keep doing and keep building? And what was really hard? Like, what are you were starting to talk about that, Tony, of like getting back in person, because organizing virtually is hard. But is there anything that you learned in organizing during the pandemic that you want to keep with you in organizing going forward? Anyone? Karim, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump
Karim,
in.
why don't you start?
All right. For folks who've been in community organizing spaces, there's people often say like community organizing is hard. I say, yeah, it's hard, but it's not impossible. And even when it got even harder with the pandemic, it was still not impossible. We could still do it. We had to get a little bit more creative about the way we did things, you know. But like one of the things that we did. So for me, action is the oxygen to any organization. If we stop doing action, then what the heck are we meeting for, right? It shifted a little bit during the pandemic because we couldn't just show up to like the Board of Supervisors meetings, right? So we did what a lot of other folks were doing. We did house visits, like we organized caravans, and just thinking of one particular moment when the County Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County was supposed to consider extending the eviction protections that we still have to right now. We organized about 2 hours of public comments to be on the virtual meeting, and they moved the item to like a month from then, and the board president cheered, celebrated the fact that they didn't have to listen to 2 hours of our public comments. So we said, nah, you're going to listen to our public comment. We organized 30 vehicles to shut down her street, and then we showed up with a speaker and a microphone to her front door so that she had to listen to all those public comments. She was pissed, you know, and we ruffled some feathers, but renters are still protected in Sonoma County till June. So we still got some more actions to do.
Evie, you wanna?
Yeah, I mean, our recruitment was really anemic during the, not to overuse that word, I guess I'm overusing that word. It was really challenging. We had more people like sign up for things virtually, but almost no good follow through or no way to like connect with people really well. And then, so building community became really, really challenging for us. But we had a lot more people come to speak at city council meetings and at supervisors meetings. It's just way easier to do by phone. And I really hope that we are able to preserve that, because man, when you've got kids showing up at the Board of Supervisors on a Tuesday, sometime between 9 and 4 it's just not a thing that most people can do, right? So, that was the one thing that I would want to keep, is making it easier for the public to participate in it. I would like to see more, you know, recorded voice messages, and like not having to wait through the whole meeting, but like having people have whatever tools they have and whatever language they have, provide their story and their 2 minutes in whatever way is easiest for them, and try to make it even more accessible.
That's great. Tony, is there anything you would add?
No, I mean, I think they both like really, you know, hit it. I think for us, like, I know there's already some cities who are trying to get rid of, doing the virtual meetings and going back to like in-person city council, which would be a huge loss for us. Because as Evie mentioned, like we have never seen higher turnouts like, during this whole time, because it's accessible to folks who are perhaps working but could be on the phone listening in and waiting for their public comment time to speak. And if they get rid of that, we'll lose that. And I think it's obviously intentional. I'm sure that these elected officials have seen the huge turnout, how long it takes just to listen to all the public comment. It can take like 3-4 hours. And they were many of them were completely open about it and saying like, wow, like, this is taking too long. We're going to cut down the public comment from like 2 minutes to like 60 seconds and like, tactics like that they were doing. So I'm sure like it's convenient for them to, get rid of the electronic way to participate. And the actions, I'm with Karim, more of that is definitely needed. I know before I joined Monument Impact, there was an action to block the courts, the housing courts, right? Eviction court. And at least for that day, people didn't get evicted, right? And I think for many organizers, that was a win, even if it's just for one day, that they were able to show that they have the power to shut down a whole court. And I think more of that, as we think about the protection that's in place now, when it expires, more of that escalation needs to happen. And it shouldn't just come from organizers. I think many organizations who do direct services are directly seeing the impact that this is having on many of their clients, the people that they work with, and they also need to start thinking about escalation. And so this is my invitation to anyone in the room, that if you work as a direct service, start thinking about working closer with organizers, because we're not that bad, we're not that scary, and we're here to create changes, systematic changes that you all, I know, want to see, and that we want to see, and our community members want to see as well.
Yeah, great. I'll open it up to questions from the public and also online if there are any. But before I do, just one last question building off of that, which is inviting folks who don't do organizing work in the suburbs, maybe they're not in the suburbs or maybe they don't do organizing work. What advice would you give? What should they know about working with you? Maybe another way to put this is, what is your biggest pet peeve of what somebody, when a group tries to partner with you? Okay, Kareem's got some pet peeves of things not to do if you want to partner.
Well, I would say for us, the big one, because here's what usually happens. There's a group who might need the community that we represent to quote unquote sit at the table, right? Where I come from is if you're asking for us to be seated at the table, I want to discuss who else is at that table, and let's have a frank conversation about how much power they bring, because there's certain individuals in our communities who have way more power than we do, and if you're offering them one seat, I'm gonna need 10 seats at that table. So that's the bigger. That's one pet peeve for me.
Tony?
You want to go for it? Or, yeah. I think something that we struggle with as organizers in the suburbs is that people think we're not organized in the suburbs.
That's right.
Right? I think people who work in like more urban or in cities, and even for myself as, who organized in New York City, like coming and living, like working in Contra Costa County, I had my own misconceptions of what organizing is, and I thought it would be like a cakewalk, but it's probably more difficult to organize in the suburbs. And so I would definitely say that we have our ducks in order, for folks who have never organized in the suburbs. We know what we're doing. And we have been doing this for years, even if it's not as visible or doesn't get as much media coverage as, things that are happening in bigger cities. But we are doing great work. And so I guess one of my pet peeves is that people have this misconception that we don't know how to organize, and we have seen it in Contra Costa County when we are one of the county jails in Richmond had an ICE contract. We were organizing to terminate that ICE contract from the sheriff's department, and it took a lot of years to get to that point with, we did it in coalition with a lot of faith organizations and obviously like the Immigrant Rights Coalition that I was working with. So it took years to mobilize folks, do the advocacy work, talk to community members, to finally get to the point where the sheriff was like, okay, I'm going to terminate this thing. And then for other larger organizations who don't have any base in our county to come in and start wanting to lead the work after we had already done everything, and start taking credit for something that they had nothing to do with, and weren't even in contact with family members who had people incarcerated. So we know what we're doing.
Abby.
So yeah, we know what we're doing, and what we're doing is important. Just if we have the best public policies and the strongest organizations in San Francisco, Chicago, and New York, we're still going to lose. Like, we can't win with just the cities. And if in the Bay Area we're only strong in Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose, that's a whole bunch of people that are in a whole lot of trouble. So yeah, it's what we do, we're good at it, and it's really, really, really important.
Thank you. Are there questions from the audience? All right. I think I'm going to do the mic run. And are there any questions coming in online? Not yet. Okay, great. And please introduce yourself. Say your name, where you're from.
Hi, my name is Emily. I live in Mountain View, which is like the best city. I work for SB at Home. We're a housing advocacy organization that works on housing policy. But it's very important to us that we empower these historically excluded communities to speak for themselves. But how do you balance that out with, in some immigrant communities, there may be, at worst, misinformation out there, and at best, or not at best, but like not as bad, inefficient ways of organizing kind of thing. How do you balance that out while making sure that those communities feel empowered to speak for themselves?
Thank you. Great question. I'm going to say, Evie, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, so we work really closely with organizers that represent those communities to help make sure that the communities that they're organizing are prepared for wherever they're going to speak. So we try to give them as much information as possible. If they let us come to their meetings, we'll come to their meetings. We'll provide them with any information that they need. But it's mostly important that people speak from their own experience, right? And we also need to make sure that the councils or whoever they're speaking to hear them, because that's the other challenge that we have, is like super dismissive councils. And there's nothing worse than finally getting a volunteer to get engaged and have them show up and have the council just be like, they're not even on the screen. They're like, they're just gone. Or they're like, back in the in-person days, they would start playing with their phone or get up and get snacks, So you have to talk to the council too and just be like, be present. You can do that. So anyway, but I'd love to hear what other people.
Anything to add?
I learned a very valuable lesson out in the Central Valley about, I was organizing with immigrant families that had children with developmental or intellectual disabilities, and what may seem like a chaotic meeting to us was actually the exact meeting that they needed in order to develop their leadership, right? So I don't know exactly what the misinformation or is, but I would try to take a step back and not put the onus on the people who may have the information, and ask yourself what are some, can we put the onus on structural problems as opposed to the individuals who may be struggling? That I think that sometimes is helpful.
Awesome. Okay. Other hands up? We'll go here and then next to you.
Daryl with Family Assistance Program in San Bernardino County. One of the areas that we struggle with is finding the balance between building partners and scorched earth. You know, so like the comment that you made, I tend to go the direction of we've got our team together, we're moving forward, the city is pulling some bullshit, and we're going to stop it. We're just going to get up and we're going to publicly humiliate them, and we're going to put them on blast, and we're going to scare them so that they will stop doing this to our community. On the other hand, then I've burned all those bridges and all those people hate me and the city won't work with us anymore. So some other people in our group think that we need to come from the direction of building friends and let's help work together and let's move them in the right direction. And I'm just wondering if any of you guys have found a solution to finding that middle ground, or is it better to go one extreme or the other, or how do you determine when to go extreme?
Yeah, I mean, I think since in Contra Costa, like, funders like to call us the land of coalitions. In a coalition, there's different members, different folks, and I feel like everyone plays a role, and I feel like X person can be the face to agitate them and be like, oh, we're gonna get you mad. But in the same coalition, there's another Y person who actually plays a different role. And I think that's where we have been able to find balance, at least in Contra Costa County, where everyone knows that the role that they play, but we're all trying to achieve the same goal nonetheless. And for us, that tactic has worked at sometimes, like, we don't have to show up if it's a meeting about, like, you know, like a meeting where we're not looking to anger anybody, like, we won't show up. Like, somebody else will play that role, but they represent our coalition. Does that make sense? So that's how we have been able to at least find that balance in a lot of the spaces when it comes to meeting with, like, elected officials or people who have some level of power, where we're not looking to burn bridges. They could at least identify a face and say, well, we can meet with this person, but we won't meet with them because we know how they are. But we still represent and we share the same values in some way, and ultimately the same goal.
What were you gonna say? Well, I was just gonna say, like, incorporate the the public officials' decision into your escalation strategies. You know, so I guess what I mean by that is we are always mindful to give public officials the choice. You can either be with us on this one or against us, right? And we'll make that pretty public. You can either be the hero or the villain, right? But always, we put the ball in their court. We're gonna react to however you act, and that's really up to them, right? I'm trying to stay away from using too many faith analogies, because but I do faith-based organizing. But I'll often think about, like, one of my favorite stories is that of Moses, right? And how he was approaching Pharaoh and saying, "Let my people go, or we'll escalate every single time." That's the last faith-based one I'll do. But it's in that same sort of I think context about, like, how do you incorporate that as a very clear polarization in your escalation?
Yeah, I totally agree with both those. Yeah, you need to have a wide enough, even in the very shallow suburbs, you need to have a wide enough pool of people that somebody's willing to poke the bear, somebody's willing to say, no, this is the bottom line, and somebody's got to be, come on, I know it hurts your feelings that they were so mean and they said that thing in the paper and it's really upsetting, but we understand, but if you just do this thing now, right? So somebody's got to be that person. You can't all be the same flavor and expect to have a feast. You got to have all the different flavors. All of us have got to bring on our own unique. You just got to make sure that whoever's the salve after you poke the bear, but then the salve can't be like, give away the store. It's got to be like, here's the path to doing the right thing, which is tricky. It's not. It sounds easier than it actually is.
Right.
Hi, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having this panel. It's really helpful to hear your perspectives, and I'm glad that we're talking about all of this. I work in rural areas, so I definitely understand the white neighborhoods, conservativeness, and then also a lack of resources. So my question is, how do you take that time to build relationships, build capacity, and like see the long game when it can take years and years and years to build toward your goal? So just from your perspective as organizers, how do you stay passionate and see that long game when it sometimes feels so far away?
So, I think, you can't be reliant on external decisions to be what keeps your organization going and the momentum. You have to build your own momentum, whether it is an action or an event, or you have to create the momentum. You can't have everything you do be in reaction to a power structure that's ignoring you. That's not going to work. That's one thing that I think is absolutely critical for organizing anywhere outside of cities. And then the second thing is it's about building a community. It's about building those relationships and the trust within each other. And that is, that can be about making decisions together. That can be about, you can do all kinds of things together collectively that don't necessarily, you're not going to end, bad landlord practices overnight, but you can do other things like maybe band together to keep people's cars from being towed or whatever the thing is. And you have to celebrate those successes. That's my experience. Otherwise, you're so.
I would also say that I've gotten to train many community organizers, and one of the things that's hard to train people around is this desire to be endlessly curious. Because we get to do that. We get to be endlessly curious about other people's stories. We get to be endlessly curious about how systems operate and how we can influence them. I think that when you experience, as a result of that curiosity, being able to harness people's spark to do something. I think it was Fred Ross that says that community organizers are social arsonists. Like, we go around setting people on fire. I really think about that of like, there's a lot of beauty in harnessing that flame into somebody who's like a lit leader,
Anything to add, Tony?
Nah, not really. I mean, that was great.
That's great. Are there other questions? I saw a hand here and then back there.
Hey, thanks so much for this presentation. Really loving it. My name is Susie Dershowitz. I'm a staff attorney at Public Advocates, and I had the great privilege of working with North Bay Organizing Project when I was at Legal Aid of Sonoma County.
Oh, nice.
One thing that has been percolating for me, and I'm just curious if any of you could speak on this, is, when I think about doing this work in more suburban places versus more urban places, one thing that's popping up for me is, there's just so many different groups that work on housing when you're doing this work in Oakland. It's like so saturated. There's so many people in the room. There's so many housing advocates. Whereas my experience in Sonoma County was, a lot more focus on intersectional organizing, like especially with housing, like linking housing, environmental groups, and labor. And I feel like it was actually a really effective way to build power across these different issue areas. I'm just curious if you all could speak to that aspect at all.
Yeah, I feel like building intersectional power has been able to is how we have been able to shift things in Contra Costa County, at least in Concord, by bringing in the immigrant right groups into our work, because a lot of the tenants who we work with are immigrants. They are undocumented. They get threatened by their landlord or their property manager to call ICE if they complain about X, Y, or Z. And so that has been a way for us to build more intersectional power, right? I think another thing that we have been seeing is folks who have served their time, and are getting released from the county jail. And one of the biggest issues that we're seeing now is they don't know where to go. They don't have housing. And so connecting the dots as organizers and getting to the root of it all, and going into, meetings with the board of supervisors or local, like city council, is we share the same issues and like sharing the same struggle and connecting the dots for them to see like this is a lot bigger than just immigrant rights or like tenant rights, like and at least for us in the county, that has been really our strongest way to start shifting things is by building that intersectional power with other groups and other organizations who are doing different work from what we're doing. But we see that it's impacting with the people that we work with.
Yeah, and in the suburbs, we don't get a whole lot of, we don't got the luxury to like say, we're only gonna work with housing folks. Because that's like what, a handful of organizations? We wouldn't have enough power to win anything if we stuck to that philosophy. And I think what it forces us to do is to figure out ways to articulate those intersectionalities without using so much academic language. Because I think that's actually where we then, like I want like everyday folk to be able to like understand if you're unionizing at your workplace and you're getting a higher wage, we want to make sure that that extra wage doesn't go to rent and it goes to your kid's karate class. Like that, those are the kinds of things that we're forced to figure out how to communicate.
Well, because of recertification, I had to, it's under the table money for work, so it was reported only as a grants contribution at $40 a month, but it's now netted down to 25 because under the public housing policy, that would count it as income that was, you know, and there is the issue of under the table work, which if it's written in a check,
Thank you. We could have a whole other session about the vouchers and the housing authority income, but that's a really important point about people being able to not have all their wages go to rent. Evie, did you have anything you wanted to add to this question? All right, we had another question back here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Charles Liuzzo. I'm a developer with Eden Housing. So I have a question kind of about faith-based organizations specifically. I'm working on a project now, anticipating some lively community feedback, possibly pushback. And I understand our project's right in the middle of their neighborhood. And so I'm kind of thinking through our outreach strategy, and I know there's some influential churches in the area, and I'd like to connect with them and talk with them about the project. So from a faith-based organization perspective, what are the pro-housing messages that really, and reasons that resonate with them and connect with the mission of faith-based organizations that will, you know, get them on board with the little mini coalition we're trying to build for our project?
Like, are you looking for like a theological reflection on that? Because, I'm probably not the best person to ask for that because I'm not a priest or anything like that. But I do, and what I would say is one of the common threads throughout all faith communities is the desire to exist and stay relevant in a time where churches are on the decline. So even just outside of a theological take on what you're speaking to, I think that there's a very clear interest for faith communities to have to respond to the needs of their congregants, and which is housing. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but I'll be happy to talk after this if you want.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, it gives them something to talk about and think all for their community about, so it's an opportunity for them, right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think so. I mean, are you talking about like building affordable housing on church properties?
No, but it's down the street from it.
Gotcha.
Well,
Evie, sorry, one second.
issues is
Evie, did you want to add to that?
No, one of the problems
No?
I have with faith-based coalitions is, I'm not Catholic, but with the California Network of Mental Health Clients, the Catholic was 100% behind a bill that would provide due process in the child. A woman who was lesbian immediately made an issue of the Catholic Church's views on LGBT. Now that's a major issue, but for me, you have to say we'll agree to disagree. The Catholic Church has a lot of adherents in this state. It has always been a bastion of social justice. We can work on that. We can agree. We have to hold our nose and agree to disagree. There's a lot of people who have issues with the fact that some faith communities are not on the same page with issues like LGBT and so on. You know?
Thank you. I think that as we're talking about working with different coalition partners, and if I can interpret your comment as a question there, but where are there points where maybe you don't agree with some of the people who you have to work with? And how do you negotiate that? Right. How do you negotiate that?
How do you agree to disagree? How do
Thank
you
you.
recognize what's more important? My view is that if a
I'm going to ask the panelists to answer that question, but thank you very much for raising it.
Yeah, I mean, we disagree with each other all the time. Conflict is good. Often we come to better understandings, we see the world more clearly, we have better solutions when we listen to each other, when we argue with each other. I think it's really important that we try to, as much as possible, it doesn't always work, but try to argue off screen, not necessarily in the papers, but one-on-one or behind, talk to each other first, and try to come to a common agreement, at least with the organizations that we see as our natural allies in a community, if it's possible. It is challenging. There's an activist in Redwood City that considers himself a racial justice activist. He's a former cop. He's white. He opposes all affordable housing. And I'm here to tell you, he is not a social justice activist. And as much as I'm willing to talk to him, I'm also going to stand up and say yes to affordable housing, even if he doesn't agree with it.
But how do you work in coalition when there are emotional, or what they call culture war issues that often divert from important issues?
Yeah, I think that, so I've come up against this a lot, and it's often, the way that I've learned to deal with it is, even sometimes amongst ourselves, a very stern agitation around the notion of power. Like, can we afford to be split in these ways, right? So just to reveal more about myself, I was also raised Catholic, but there's a joke about educated Chicanos. Like, once you're an educated Chicano, you leave the Catholic Church. That's a sign of. But and I'm no different, right? And my own spiritual practice, I do Aztec dancing and whatnot. And in those spaces, there's often like this critique of, we gotta be decolonized, and why go to any Catholic churches? And I say, go to any Spanish mass at a Catholic church, and it's standing room only. And if we're serious about building power and building power with the immigrant community, then we got to go where they're at, right? We're going to meet them where they're at. So I think the agitation is around, are we serious about building power?
Tony, do you want to add to this one?
No, I mean.
Where have you had coalition partners or you disagreed? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I feel like, kind of going back to the question, like when there was in Contra Costa County like a large influx of like refugees that were coming in from like the Middle East, it was the churches who responded. So I just feel like there has to be a language or something that we can, like some level where I feel like when it comes to housing, like some moral thing where we have to tap into, and like there has been like a lot of great faith organizers that I feel like should be leading a lot of the spaces and be leading a lot of the conversations around having meetings with those faith groups who are opposed to any sort of like affordable housing in their backyard or anything that's, progressive. I feel like they should be the ones having those one-on-ones with other faith folks and building solutions together, because I feel like they're the best people to tap into the hearts, I guess, of folks who are opposed to any sort of, progress.
Thank you. Other questions? I think we have time for one or two. I know we're at the end of a long conference. I see a couple more hands here. We'll go here, and then Peter, you'll get the last question.
Thank you. My name is Nasim, and I provide direct legal services in Santa Clara County. And Tony, you were talking about how the shift from direct services to organizing, and that's something we're really trying to push for in my organization as well. And we are doing existing organizing, but I don't think it's been named for what it is. And we're finding, for instance, some staff are hesitant to move beyond direct services into more organizing spaces. So I was really curious for kind of two questions. One, what kind of steps did your organization take in making that shift with that new executive director to expand the kind of work you're all doing? And then more generally, how do you build credibility in suburbs where there isn't existing organizing that you're aware of, and you're coming in as kind of a new organizational player trying to help build that momentum among tenants in those areas?
Yeah, and I think even internally within our organization, that's still a challenge. Like, a lot of our different programs still don't understand what organizing is. Like, why is it important? Like, why did we have to create this program? But I think just doing like internal education has helped. Like, I've developed, like presentations, curriculums to do to the rest of the staff on the importance of organizing. The members themselves speak directly on the experience of like making public comment or organizing a tenant association, and seeing the level of power that it creates with them internally, that I think is starting to, like, the other people are starting to notice that, oh wow, we should have been doing this a long time ago, and not so like just 5 years ago, because so much could have changed. I think if at least Monument Impact was doing this from when it originally started, got founded in 20 years ago. And so a lot of internal education, I think, is definitely the most important thing. I think for a lot of direct service organizations, the worries and the what ifs is not new. I think this has been happening for years, everywhere that you go. And so I think it's just about bringing other direct service agencies who were just doing that but are now also doing organizing, and I'm happy to help in some way, because I feel like more of that is needed, and especially in the suburbs where we have more direct service organizations rather than organizing. But I'm happy to support in any way that I can.
I'll just add on that one of the things we've been talking about within the Regional Suburban Organizing Project is the need to have more resources for service-based organizations in the suburbs to do organizing work. And so we've been talking in the South Bay Sacred Heart, I'm sure you're familiar with, is another one that's a part of us that's gone through that transition as well in doing both direct service and organizing. And so we've been talking of putting together the manual or resources to help other organizations with making that case internally. Because it is true, kind of the first organizing campaign you have to do then is with your own colleagues and getting them on board with organizing, and seeing it as a part of the bucket of strategies. Karim or Evie, did you want to add anything?
Well, go ahead. I mean, you got to get people comfortable with conflict, right? And you can't organize well if you're not poking the bear. And most service providers get into service work because they want to be do-gooders, right? So, and conflict is very, very, very uncomfortable for people when they first do it. So it's a matter of seeing, like, if we want to get at the root cause of this, we're going to have to do things, and we can maybe poke the bear nicely, but we got to poke the bear. At some point, you got to poke the bear.
Totally.
Hi, folks. Great discussion. My name's Peter, and I've run a coalition of housing organizations in San Francisco for a bunch of years, so it's a very urban experience. But I think there's some principles of organizing that I've learned that apply, and I've worked in the suburbs in previous years. In my own words, one of them.
Where are you from?
San Francisco. Yeah. One of them is sort of tactically making more friends than enemies. Another is educate before you castigate, if you will. And a third one is that ultimately you're trying to win over hearts and minds. You're not just trying to get a one-off win, but you're trying to change people's views and experiences. And I know those are easier things to say than to do, but they're sort of principles of whole. So I'm just wondering, you know, when you're in these kind of suburban communities, you are going to deal with some folks who have some really weird ideas. And how do you not just write them off? How do you see that long game of changing hearts and minds, of potentially finding the new friends? What are some of the things that you've found are successful?
Who's going to call him on having weird ideas in San Francisco?
That's making people think.
Yeah. So, Peter, I think there's a lot more weird ideas coming out of San Francisco than out of San Mateo, but yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what's so beautiful about the region, right? Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to listen to people and hear what they're saying. But I also think there is value in absolutely talk to people before you castigate it, but it's okay to hold up people as an example. It's okay to hold up organizations as examples, right? We have, in our area, we have the Sierra Club. It's one of the most NIMBY Sierra Club chapters in the state. They're suing over the first affordable housing development on the coast. They are opposed to an affordable housing development in Daly City. They are opposed to an affordable housing development in Redwood City, right next to the train station. They are opposed, they fought against a homeless service station in an area that has tons of encampments. And even the project that they supposedly supported, they actually spoke out against at the hearing. So I think it's important to be able to just name that, right? And like yes, they are organizing against this project, but they absolutely organized against anything that changes the landscape in San Mateo County. And it's pretty, but it isn't perfect, and we can do better. So I think there's a lot of value in organizations being willing to publicly say, we disagree with you, and we need you to be a better partner or be a better organization. How's that for being harsh?
Yeah, I would say for me, it took me a while to learn some of those lessons that you're referring to, because I very much started as, you know, a loud, pissed off Chicano, you know, and when I heard, you know, there's the saying that there's no permanent friends, no permanent enemies in the political arena, I took that as, well, cool, and I can treat anybody however, right? But what, you know, I think what became clear to me is that even if there are no quote unquote permanent enemies, there's some definitely long-term opposition. You know, so if there's long-term opposition, what's the work that needs to happen so that we can create some long-term allies? Yeah, I think that's where it started getting clearer for me.
I'm an organizer, so I have an ED who handles the rest. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I shouldn't have became ED.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists.
Good stuff.
Thank you to the conference organizers, and safe travels home.